You've been taught to look outside for answers, but what if everything you're chasing is already within you, waiting for your attention? You're not stuck. You're just too focused on everything but yourself. The human brain is a record of the past. Every experience, every memory, every emotional reaction has carved its way into the neural architecture, etching pathways that define who you are, what you expect, and what you unconsciously recreate. Now understand this: wherever your attention goes, your energy follows, and that is not metaphorical. It's physiological, neurological, and energetic. When you wake up in the morning and your first thoughts are drawn to the problems of yesterday, the tension in your relationship, the bill you forgot to pay, the regret over what you said, your attention is instantly transported into the past. And because your body doesn't know the difference between an actual experience and the thought of that experience, it produces the same chemicals, the same cortisol, the same adrenaline, the same emotional state. Your biology re-enters the very situation you're trying to move away from. That means your energy, your life force is feeding the same familiar reality. You're not just remembering the past, you are recreating it. Think about this. The average person thinks between 60, 0 to 70, 0 thoughts per day, and 90% of those thoughts are the same ones they thought the day before. If attention is energy, and the majority of your attention is trapped in repetitive patterns, how much energy do you have left to create something new? Very little. You're attempting to change while dragging the past into the future. Now let's shift perspective. Let's assume for a moment that you begin to observe your thoughts, not judge them, not analyze them, just witness them. You notice when your mind wants to rehearse a familiar drama, when your thoughts wander to what they said, what they did, what you should have said. And instead of feeding that pattern, you simply bring your awareness back, not to what's outside of you, but to what's within. That moment is powerful, because now you are reclaiming your attention. You are interrupting the energetic leakage that's been feeding the same emotional addictions day after day. You are taking your power back from the people, the places, and the events that have defined your identity for years, maybe even decades. Focus is not just about productivity. It is about presence. It's about liberating your energy from the gravitational pull of the familiar and intentionally placing it into the unknown, the space where true creation happens. That space is not out there. It's within you, and here's where science meets consciousness. The frontal lobe, the executive center of your brain, is the seat of focus, decision, and intention. When activated, it silences the emotional noise from the limbic brain, the part responsible for survival reactions. By intentionally focusing on a new future, not the predictable known, but a vision aligned with your highest self, the frontal lobe commands your brain to rewire itself. Neurons begin to fire in new sequences, in new patterns, in new combinations. You are not just thinking differently, you are becoming someone else. And as your attention becomes coherent, your energy becomes coherent. Your electromagnetic field begins to shift. Heart rate variability improves. Brain wave patterns change. You move from survival to creation, from reaction to intention, from fragmentation to wholeness. The truth is, most people have scattered attention. Part of their energy is stuck in resentment, another part in guilt, another in anger toward the past, another in anxiety about the future. Their consciousness is fragmented. And in that state, it's impossible to manifest anything new because they are not fully available in the present. But when you begin to focus on yourself, not selfishly, but consciously, and direct your attention inward, you begin to consolidate your energy. You begin to unify the pieces of yourself that were lost in trauma, comparison, distraction, and validation. Seeking, you begin to call your power back. And what is power, if not energy under conscious control? Now imagine waking up tomorrow morning, and instead of defaulting to the thoughts of yesterday, you direct your attention deliberately. You place it on gratitude, not for what has happened, but for what's coming. You place it on your breath, on your body, on your intention for the day. Not the reactive list of tasks and problems, but the elevated emotions of who you want to become. That's not daydreaming, that's rehearsal. You are installing new circuits in your brain. You are training your body to feel what it's like to be free, to be whole, to be abundant before anything external has changed. That's creation, and it begins with focus. Focus is an act of energetic discipline. It's a refusal to be pulled into the noise of the world, the chaos of media, the urgency of everyone else's narrative. When you commit to focusing on yourself, you are declaring to the universe that your inner world matters more than your outer circumstances. And ironically, that's when your outer world begins to shift. Not because you forced it, but because your energy has changed. Everything is energy. Everything responds to vibration, and your vibration is a direct result of your attention. You want to change your life. Change where you place your attention, because energy will always flow to the object of your awareness, and whatever you consistently focus on, you begin to embody, you begin to magnetize, you begin to attract. The moment you understand that your attention is the currency of your creation, you stop spending it on things that drain you. You stop investing in the pain of the past or the projections of the future. You become wealthy not in material possessions, but in consciousness, rich in presence, abundant in possibility. There comes a moment in every individual's life when the illusions of the external world begin to crack, when the chase for outcomes, approval, recognition, or even healing outside of oneself feels increasingly hollow. That moment is not a breakdown. It is the beginning of remembering. It is the realization that you are not here to control the external world. You are here to master your internal state. And in doing so, you begin to understand the truth. You are not a victim of your environment. You are the source of it. The conditioning starts early. From the moment we are born, we are taught to respond to our surroundings. Cry, and someone gives you comfort. Smile, and someone approves. Perform, and someone rewards. From these micro moments, a pattern forms. Our sense of identity becomes shaped by what is happening around us. We begin to believe that how we feel inside is dictated by what unfolds outside. And so, unconsciously, we place the power of our inner state into the hands of people, circumstances, and outcomes. That is the architecture of disempowerment. But what happens when you decide to flip the lens, when you no longer ask, what do I need to change out there to feel better in here? But instead, what can I shift in here so that out there responds differently? That is the beginning of becoming the source. That is the start of reclaiming authorship over your reality. Your body is a reflection of your state of consciousness. Your environment is a projection of your energetic blueprint, and your life, every part of it, is a mirror reflecting the vibration you hold most often. This is not philosophy. This is biology, physics, and consciousness colliding. When you live in chronic stress, when your thoughts are wired into fear, competition, judgment, or lack, your body lives in a survival mode. The chemistry of stress is highly addictive. Cortisol, adrenaline, norepinephrine, they keep the body tethered to the same emotions, the same behaviors, the same predictable patterns. Over time, those chemicals become part of your identity. You're not stressed, you become stress. You're not angry, you become anger. And if that emotional state is who you think you are, how could you possibly be the creator of anything new? To become the source, you must interrupt the loop. You must recognize that the way you think and feel today is not a reflection of truth, it is a program installed through repetition, reaction, and unconscious agreement. And the only way to change it is to step back into the seat of the observer, not the personality, but the presence. The field of awareness that exists behind the thoughts, beneath the feelings, beyond the noise. That field is where the source resides. That's where you are untouched, unbroken, and unlimited. The external world offers temporary stimulation. The internal world holds infinite regeneration, but most people reverse the formula. They attempt to feel whole by acquiring, by achieving, by gaining more. The job, the partner, the praise, the possession. They believe that wholeness is something to earn, but wholeness is not earned. It is remembered. It is realized the moment you stop seeking and start being. And being begins by turning your attention inward. When you bring your awareness into yourself without judgment, you begin to feel subtle layers of sensation. The breath moves differently, the body softens, the heart speaks, and in that moment the mind quiets. You begin to sense the raw material of creation, the pure, undirected life force flowing through you. That energy is not coming from someone else. It is not borrowed from your environment. It is arising from you. You are the wellspring, you are the origin point, and whatever you direct that energy toward through thought, through emotion, through intention begins to materialize in form. You don't have to manipulate matter to change your life. You don't have to wait for permission, for the world to shift, for the timing to be right. You only need to change the signal you are broadcasting. You only need to align with a version of yourself that is no longer seeking, but remembering that everything you've ever wanted, safety, love, freedom, expansion, is not something you chase. It's something you generate. And how do you generate it? Through alignment, through presence, through deliberate, coherent states of being. When your thoughts are no longer contradicting your emotions, and your emotions are no longer driven by your past, you reach a place of energetic integrity. You are no longer fractured between who you think you are and who you want to be. You become congruent, and in that congruency, the external begins to reflect the internal. This is why some people, even in the midst of chaos, radiate peace. Why others, surrounded by scarcity, emanate abundance. They are not reacting to their environment is reacting to them, because they have become the source. The world is always reflecting you back to yourself. If you want to know what you're broadcasting, look at what's showing up, not to judge it, not to resist it, but to understand this is the current feedback from the field. The question is not, why is this happening to me? The question is, what within me is sustaining this pattern, and am I willing to change it? That change begins with awareness, not dramatic action, not forced positivity, not spiritual bypassing, but awareness. The quiet courage to sit with yourself and ask, where am I giving my power away? Where have I placed the key to my inner peace in someone else's pocket? And what would it feel like to bring it back? You don't need to become someone else to change your life. You need to unbecome everything that made you forget who you are, because beneath the stories, the defense mechanisms, the egoic identities, and the chronic overthinking, there is a deeper you, whole, sovereign, radiant. And that version of you does not wait for life to offer meaning. It brings meaning to life, because it remembers the self is not a passenger in the journey. For most of human history, survival depended on belonging. Being part of a group meant safety. Approval meant acceptance, and rejection meant danger. These ancient neurological patterns still live within the modern human, but now they operate in the digital world, in our careers, in our relationships, in every scroll, every like, every spoken or unspoken need for validation. What was once rooted in survival has become a chronic addiction to external confirmation. The truth is, the majority of people are not living their own lives. They are living projections of what they believe others will approve of. And in doing so, they abandon the essence of who they really are. Validation is not inherently wrong. It feels good to be seen, acknowledged, appreciated. But when your emotional state becomes dependent on whether or not someone else approves of you, when your worth rises and falls on the opinions, reactions, or recognition of others you have handed over your inner compass, you are no longer creating. You are performing. You are no longer in alignment. You are in reaction. And yet, the mind is clever. It disguises this addiction under the illusion of ambition, of connection, of love. You dress for approval, you speak to be accepted, you post to be noticed, you agree to be liked. Slowly, imperceptibly, you begin editing yourself, cutting away the parts that feel too different, too risky, too honest, until the version of you that walks through the world is more of a mask than a presence. And then, even when validation comes, it feels empty, because deep down you know it's not you they're validating. It's the costume you've put on. The biology behind this is powerful. Every time someone approves of you, even with something as simple as a compliment, a smile, or a like, your brain releases dopamine. Dopamine reinforces the behavior. It creates a feedback loop, the same loop seen in addiction. It teaches your nervous system, do that again, be that again, say that again. And so, yourself slowly becomes a construct built out of reactions, not from your truth, but from the expectations of the world around you. Now ask yourself, how much of your daily energy is spent trying to manage how others see you? How many choices are made not from clarity, but from fear of disapproval, of judgment, of standing out? How often do you quiet your truth because you're afraid of how loud it might sound in a room that's built on conformity? When you live for external validation, you are perpetually scanning your environment for signals, facial expressions, tone of voice, messages, reactions. You are no longer attuned to your own inner voice. You're outsourcing your intuition, and what you're really doing in those moments is scattering your energy, fragmenting your presence. You are in many places at once in their mind, in their perception, in their judgment, and yet not fully here, not fully in you. To break the habit of external validation, you must first understand that it is a habit, a deeply conditioned neural pattern rooted in emotional memory. Somewhere in your history, your brain linked approval with love. It linked achievement with worth. It linked obedience with safety, and that neural network has been firing unconsciously ever since. But the moment you bring it into awareness, you step into the seat of the observer. And the observer is not addicted. The observer does not need to perform. The observer simply sees. This is where true transformation begins, not by fighting the habit, not by pretending you don't care what others think, but by disassembling the internal architecture that made you believe you needed their approval to begin with. You do this through presence, through stillness, through remembering that the truth of who you are has nothing to prove, nothing to perform, nothing to seek. It only has to be embodied. When you begin to validate yourself not as a mantra, but as a frequency, you start to move differently. You speak without over-explaining. You create without needing applause. You walk into rooms without shrinking or inflating. You stop chasing being understood and start understanding yourself, and that inner coherence generates a new field. People feel it. The room responds, but you're no longer hooked by the response. You're no longer dependent on their reflection to know who you are. This shift rewires the brain. It calms the sympathetic nervous system, which has been in overdrive trying to anticipate others' responses. It stabilizes heart rate variability. It brings the body into homeostasis. And from that state, your creative energy, the same energy that was once spent managing perceptions, becomes available again, available to dream, to design, to build, to express. You reclaim your life force. But there is another layer to this. Beneath the addiction to validation is often an unconscious fear of rejection. Rejection feels like death to the ego, but to the soul it is freedom. Because when you are no longer afraid of being misunderstood, when you are no longer trying to be palatable to everyone, you begin to attract those who resonate with your real frequency. You stop being a mirror for others' projections and become a beacon for aligned connection. This is how authenticity restructures your reality. It reorganizes your relationships, your work, your opportunities not through effort, but through vibration. It's important to understand that this isn't about isolation. This isn't about becoming emotionally cold or unreachable. It's about becoming internally whole. Because only when you are whole can you engage with others from a place of depth instead of deficiency. You don't need them to complete you. You get to share your completeness with them. You don't need their applause. You've already clapped for yourself. You begin to realize that true validation doesn't feel like a spike of excitement. It feels like peace. It feels like alignment. It feels like coming home, not to someone else's version of you, but to the unfiltered, unapologetic truth of who you are when no one else is watching. You are not hardwired to be a certain way. The patterns you live by, the emotional reactions you repeat, the thoughts that loop day after day, these are not who you are. They are who you've practiced being, and just as they were built through repetition and emotional reinforcement, they can be undone and rebuilt. The brain is not fixed. It is neuroplastic. It is malleable, and every time you think a thought, every time you feel an emotion, every time you choose an action, you are either reinforcing old circuitry or creating new pathways. The brain is a living map, and your consciousness holds the pen, but it's not just about the brain. Your entire electromagnetic field is in constant dialogue with your inner world. Your heart emits the most powerful magnetic field in your body. Your brain emits the strongest electric field. Together, they generate a coherent signal that interacts with the space around you. The field is not just something you're in, it's something you influence. It reflects your inner state like a mirror, not by judging it, but by matching it. Change the signal within, and the field must respond. The challenge is that most people try to change their external world while their internal world remains the same. They want a new life, but they carry the same thoughts. They seek new results, but they operate with the same emotions. They repeat old habits with new goals layered on top, wondering why nothing changes. The answer lies in the unconscious mind, the part of you that runs on autopilot, firing familiar neural networks, generating familiar chemical reactions, and keeping your energy aligned with the past. To rewire the brain, you must become more conscious than your programming. You must learn to sit with yourself long enough to notice what's automatic. The thoughts you wake up with, the emotional residue you carry into your day, the stories you tell yourself about who you are, what you can do, and what's possible for you. These are not neutral. They are instructions, biological instructions that your cells obey, energetic instructions that your field responds to. And when you observe them without attachment, you begin to loosen their grip. You begin to make space for something new. Visualization is not just imagination. When you mentally rehearse a new version of yourself speaking differently, moving differently, feeling differently, your brain does not distinguish that inner experience from an outer one. It begins to build the circuitry for that future self now. Synaptic connections form, neural clusters ignite. The brain begins to become the map of that experience before it ever physically happens. And when you layer that mental rehearsal with elevated emotion, with the feeling of gratitude, freedom, joy, empowerment, you're not just thinking differently. You're broadcasting a new signal. You're aligning your field with the frequency of your desired reality. This is the language of creation. It's not about forcing outcomes. It's about becoming energetically aligned with the version of reality you wish to experience. That version of reality already exists in the quantum field. It is not far away in time, it is far away in frequency, and the only way to reach it is to change your own vibration, not temporarily, not just in meditation, but as a sustained internal state. When the brain and heart are in coherence, the entire body becomes a unified instrument. The parasympathetic nervous system activates, healing accelerates, intuition sharpens, you become more sensitive to information beyond the senses, you begin to feel the subtle feedback of the field around you. Opportunities seem to emerge, synchronicities unfold, but these are not random. They are confirmations that the field has begun to respond to the new signal you're broadcasting. That's why true change doesn't come from doing more. It comes from being different, from occupying a new emotional and energetic space even before anything in your external world confirms it. And the paradox is, the moment you no longer need the external world to reflect the change, that's when it does. Because you've become the cause, not the effect. You've moved from matter trying to change matter to energy shaping reality. Repetition is essential. The old neural circuits weren't built in a day. They were rehearsed for years, often unconsciously. So to build new ones, you must become deliberate. You must choose your thoughts. You must feel your elevated emotions without waiting for the world to give you a reason. You must sit in silence and teach your body how to experience the future before it arrives. Over time, the unfamiliar becomes familiar, the old self begins to fade, and a new self more coherent, more conscious, more aligned begins to emerge. This new self carries a different field. It walks into rooms differently. It communicates without words. It magnetizes experiences, not through striving, but through resonance. And because the brain has been rewired to support this identity, and the field has been realigned to reflect it, life begins to organize around this new internal architecture. But the work is not just neurological, it's energetic. You are not simply a brain. You are a field of consciousness, interacting with an infinite sea of possibility. And every time you choose a new thought, every time you feel a new emotion, every time you act in alignment with your future instead of your past, you are broadcasting a new frequency. You are collapsing the distance between who you are and who you are becoming. And the field is always listening. The brain learns, but the field responds. When they work in coherence, you are no longer reacting to life, you are consciously creating it. The known self is a construct. It is a collection of memories, habits, emotions, and beliefs that have been rehearsed so consistently that they have become familiar, automatic, and expected. Most people spend their lives operating from this version of themselves not because it is their highest potential, but because it is predictable. The brain favors the predictable, the body memorizes it. And the identity, even if uncomfortable or unfulfilling, becomes safe. But growth, by its very nature, is unsafe to the ego. Elevation threatens the known. To evolve, you must step beyond the perimeter of what you believe is you. Not just conceptually, but neurologically, emotionally, energetically. You must learn to exist in the space where your past no longer defines you and your future has not yet become visible. That space is the unknown. And it is the birthplace of true transformation. The known self is built through repetition. Each time you respond with the same emotion to the same trigger, each time you replay the same story, think the same thought, or feel the same way about yourself, you reinforce the identity. You fire the same neural pathways. You produce the same hormonal chemistry. And over time, your body becomes the unconscious mind. You wake up and the mind goes straight to work. What do I have to worry about today? Who disappointed me yesterday? What am I lacking? These familiar thoughts produce familiar feelings, which then validate the thoughts, locking you into a loop. And you begin your day as your past self. Elevation begins with the awareness that you are not your thoughts. You are the observer of them. You are not your emotions. You are the experiencer of them. When you create space between who you are and what you habitually think and feel, you begin to dissolve the illusion that your identity is fixed. You begin to realize that everything you've called me was often just a survival adaptation, a response to conditioning, a pattern built for protection, not expansion. The body, when addicted to the chemistry of the past, will resist change. It will tell you that new behavior is uncomfortable, that new emotions are unsafe, that unfamiliar thoughts feel wrong. This is not failure. It is feedback. It is the body asking, "Are you sure we don't need to be who we've always been?" The key is not to fight the resistance, but to move through it with consciousness, to feel the discomfort of the unknown and remain present, to override the impulse to return to what's familiar by remembering who you are becoming. When you no longer react as the old self, you disrupt the pattern. When you choose a new thought, or breathe instead of overthinking, or feel gratitude instead of lack, you are teaching your brain and body something new. These small shifts, repeated daily, begin to accumulate. You begin to prune away old synaptic connections and fire new ones. You begin to teach your nervous system how to feel safe in the unknown, and the unknown starts to feel less threatening and more like home. Elevating beyond the known self is not about adding more. It is often about subtracting, releasing, letting go of the identities that were built around fear, scarcity, trauma, or performance. It's about shedding the need to be liked, to be right, to be in control. Because all of those needs were born from the known self, the one who was trying to survive. The elevated self does not need those strategies. It lives in coherence. It lives in trust. Trust becomes the foundation for expansion. Not blind faith, but embodied trust, the kind that comes from having practiced being with yourself long enough that your nervous system no longer collapses under uncertainty. You've learned to sit in the void. You've learned to hold the tension between who you were and who you're becoming without needing to rush the process. And in doing so, you become a vibrational match to new realities. New possibilities begin to emerge not because you chased them, but because you aligned with them. The elevated self is not a fantasy version of you. It is the most honest version of you. The one beneath the ego, beneath the programming, beneath the fear. It does not need to impress or defend. It does not need to force outcomes. It is powerful not because it controls, but because it surrenders to the intelligence that orchestrates all of life. It walks in coherence with that intelligence. It breathes with it. It thinks with it. It creates through it. To elevate is to embody a frequency before the world reflects it back to you. To wake up and feel abundance before the money comes. To feel whole before the relationship arrives. To feel free before the conditions change. That is not delusion, it is mastery, because you are no longer living in reaction. You are generating your internal state from within. And the moment that internal state becomes your new normal, your outer reality has no choice but to rearrange itself to reflect it. The brain begins to operate from higher order networks. The neocortex becomes more active. The frontal lobe takes leadership over the emotional centers. The heart enters coherence. The electromagnetic field you radiate becomes more ordered. Your presence shifts the room before you speak, not because you've become someone else, but because you've become more fully yourself. The known self operates from memory. The elevated self operates from possibility. One is rooted in what has been. The other is guided by what could be. And the space between them, that uncomfortable, undefined, sacred space, is where transformation happens. It's where the old stories dissolve. It's where the nervous system recalibrates. It's where the future begins to crystallize not through effort, but through alignment, not through force, but through frequency. When you begin to focus on yourself, you are not turning away from the world, you are turning inward to reclaim the source of all creation. You are no longer leaking energy into the past or scattering your attention across the noise of external approval. Instead, you are choosing to become intentional with your energy, deliberate with your focus, and sovereign in your state of being. You realize that your thoughts are not just personal, they are powerful. That every emotion you feel is not just a response to life, but a broadcast to the quantum field. And that field, ever intelligent, ever listening, responds not to what you want, but to who you are being. And who you are being is shaped by where you place your attention. When you stop outsourcing your validation and begin cultivating coherence within, your entire neurochemistry changes. Your heart and brain come into harmony. Your body shifts from survival to creation. You no longer live by the momentum of the past. You become a living signal of your future, and in that signal lives the power to rewire your brain, realign your field, and evolve beyond the known self. The self that was built through repetition, trauma, expectation, and fear that self is no longer your ceiling. It becomes your foundation, a starting point, not a limit. This journey inward is not a single act. It is a practice, a devotion, a commitment to choosing presence over pattern, creation over reaction, vision over memory, and the more you return to yourself, the more the external world rearranges to mirror the frequency of that return. You were never here to chase, to perform, or to prove. You were here to remember, to create, to expand, and everything you've been seeking, the peace, the clarity, the love, the alignment begins the moment you decide to stop looking out there and start aligning in here. Because the moment you focus on yourself fully and without apology, you activate the most powerful force in the universe, a human being who remembers they are the source.